I'm Tim O'Connor. I'm the Executive Director here at Ducray. Thank you so much for joining us for our second lecture with Charlie. We really appreciate Charlie. You know, he's so passionate about this subject that it's almost contagious. The next third lecture will be on March 23rd, which will be all about the Gardner Museum in Boston, which I'm really looking forward to. It's a really interesting subject. I watched part of his lecture yesterday, and it made me rather apprehensive about artists in general, because they're really sketchy, really sketchy. But so, not wasting more time, Charlie, it's all yours.
I'm Charles Vincent Sabba, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm an artist, a filmmaker, an art world investigative reporter, and a cultural property protection resource person. And today I'm going to explain to you just how art and criminality meet at a crossroads and travel together. But first, let me give you the little introduction of myself. I'll keep it brief. I'm a retired police captain, and here I am with some of my colleagues on the day I retired 2 years ago. All retired captains now. My law enforcement career spanned 30 years. I simultaneously, while working as a full-time police officer, I also kept a full-time art studio. I exhibited extensively. Here I am with my friend Giorgio Azzurri. He's from Rome, moved to Jersey. He taught sculpture here. And this is one interaction. The police ended up in this place in 1998 often because he was commissioned to do a police statue for the Royal Police Department. He did the entire molding of the statue of Plasticina here in the Fine Arts Room, and then it was transferred to Newark to be casted and was erected in front of the police department there. So that's a little Ducray history. A lot has happened in this place over the last 97 years. It's a wonderful place with a lot of history. So I showed extensively. I got the show in 3 really wonderful large exhibits that were called the Brucennials. There was a group that was very famous called the Bruce High Quality Foundation, and they did these Brucennials. And Guido Schnabel, seen here, he has a gallery, 2 galleries in New York, and he has a gallery in Switzerland. He was the curator of the Brucennials. And here he is with his father, Julian Schnabel. Julian Schnabel is known for these really nice paintings, like this Blue Nude, large paintings where he'd adhere broken plates to the canvases. And he also is a great filmmaker. He did a Vincent van Gogh movie, Eternity's Gate, but he also did this really great Jean-Michel Basquiat film. So both Julian Schnabel and one of my favorites, they're both favorites of mine from that period, Francesco Clemente, seen here with Vito. Francesco Clemente was born in Napoli in Naples. He lives in New York, but he was really influenced by India and Madras, and is now called Chennai. But he lives between 3 places, India, New York, and Naples. And they both showed here's an example of his work, really wonderful artist. But they both showed in the first Brucennial, which, you know, most of it was, there was like hundreds of artists in each Brucennial, and most of them were emerging artists, but then there was also some middle of the road artists. But it's a great honor to be able to say we showed with Schnabel and Clemente, and a few other of their friends were in there as well. I also showed in 4 outsider art fairs, 2 in Paris, 2 in New York. I showed in a lot of shows, but these are just some of the more notable where I had the most fun. I had 2 one-man shows at the Y Gallery on the Lower East Side, which was my favorite gallery on the Lower East Side, and it was really a great opportunity. It was great to be part of that gallery. Unfortunately, it closed because nothing in the art world lasts forever. But it was a great scene with a lot of good people. It was very interesting living in 2 different worlds, the conservative law enforcement world and the not so conservative art world in New York, and it was great to be able to go over there and cross over and get away from it all. I passed a lot of my time by utilizing the police equipment to make art objects like these gold bling bling bracelets that I painted in gold spray paint and adhered cheap rhinestones to them, but I actually carried them on the street and used them. Here's another example. And I also painted all on my bulletproof vests. So every time I got a new vest, I painted it. Jimmy can vouch because he's a retired captain from the same. He can vouch. Some of the old timers thought it was a little strange. This is a bullet loader, so I loaded hundreds of bullets. These are for who load their own reloads. I loaded hundreds of 45 caliber bullets, and instead of gunpowder, I put paint pigment. So I substituted the deadly force of the gunpowder with creative force of the paint pigment. Then I took hundreds of hours to paint them into bees and adhere wings.
That's hilarious.
And we showed 2 swarms of these, hundreds of them in 2 trees. One at one of the outsider art fairs in New York, and one at one of my one-man shows at the wine gallery. And it got a really nice reception. People, you would think it's a feeling of deadly bees, but when they were under the swarm, actually it was a serene feeling, and it kind of made me think, bees are our friends, right? They pollinate our flowers. People actually enjoy it. We let them go right under the bees. It got really interesting one day when I was printing an arrestee, and we used to do it the old school way. We had to roll our fingers in ink and ink their palms and their knife hands. Nowadays they do it electronically, but as I'm printing a guy, I realized I can use this ink and card as material to make as medium, art as medium. So I started creating images and portraits of criminals and art thieves. So this is an FBI card. This is Vincenzo Peruggi, Italian man who in 1911 stole the Mona Lisa from the Louvre and kept her 3 years, and before they recovered it, brought her back to Italy before they recovered it. Remember him because I'm going to talk about him a little later in one of the artist arrests. Oh, more importantly than the art thieves, I started searching stolen art databases where people list their artwork stolen for law enforcement to find or for different insurance companies, and I'd find stolen paintings that fit the medium that I thought would translate well. This is a stolen Massimo Campilli that was stolen in Italy. It was just mentioned by Tim. In 1990, a major heist was committed in Boston at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, in which $500 million of artwork was stolen. Rembrandt's, Manet, Vermeer's The Concert des Gars. I'm not going to get into it because you're going to have to come back March 23rd to hear my thoughts on this, but it's going to be a good one. So please try to come back. It'll be a really good one, I promise you. But in 1997, William P. Youngworth, seen here, was in the middle of heated negotiations with the authorities to try to facilitate the return of these artworks, and they failed. So these artworks are still in the wind, as we say in the business, and they are nothing was ever recovered. But William P. Youngworth once stated he has a really good sense of humor. As a matter of fact, let me tell you, he wrote me and said, "Oh, you're doing a lecture on artist crimes. You should do an art performance piece and make them pay $25 to get in and then rob them all." So this is a different sense of humor. He said, jokingly, cops and robbers, same union, different local. We do coexist. We sometimes spend a lot of time together, cops and robbers. I mean, especially during booking and processing and fingerprinting and questioning, and we're constantly spying on each other and surveillance and counter-surveillance. Both sides do it. And if it wasn't for criminals, cops wouldn't have a job. So cops, robbers, same union, different local, said jokingly. But during this whole Gardner thing, and I'll talk about it later, a well-known art loss adjuster that was trying to recover some works in the Gardner once described the art arena by stating, "When it comes to fine art, the boundaries between right and wrong and beautiful and ugly often become thin and hazy. Indeed, some of the art world's most famous personalities have been proven to be its least savory characters." And it really is true. Dealers, collectors, museum directors, curators have all been arrested for crimes and art crimes quite frequently. But it is another member of that union that has a local that belongs to criminals that we're interested here, and that is the artist. Over the centuries, artists have often been forced to live in proximity of criminals and have navigated in the murkier waters of the sea of humanity. They often were forced to live in poor, tough neighborhoods, and they coexisted with a criminal and a revolutionary element in the streets, in the taverns, and the brothels. This is a nice pastel by Henri Toulouse-Lautrec of prostitutes in the brothels. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec really felt quite at home there. So over the centuries, artists as well as poets, writers, and musicians have inhabited the toughest neighborhoods, and they had a more flexible moral red line about breaking our laws and our social norms. Here is Henri Toulouse-Lautrec defecating in public as a sort of performance art. He was born a noble into a family of nobility, and he was such a good artist, he went to Montmartre to be an artist, and he started in a regular under academic training, but he ended up being the epitome of Bohemian artist, and he did those really wonderful paintings of the cabarets and the dancers. And this is Moses by Michelangelo Buonarroti. So Moses holding the law, wonderful marble of Moses. And I posed to you the question, just what is a crime? Other than the 10 Commandments that many people believe God made law, laws were made by mere mortal human beings. They're not always accepted as just by all. An example is marijuana. Marijuana was illegal in New York and New Jersey, for example, and now is legal. And it's now legal after thousands of arrests made for small amounts of personal use, right? Prostitution is illegal here, it's legal in Amsterdam, it's legal in some places of the world, it's legal in some places in Nevada. Another really sensitive pastel drawing by Henri Toulouse-Lautrec of prostitutes in waiting, and he did always portray them with some dignity in a sensitive manner. He was well known for that. Crimes exist when lawyers and judges make case law. They decide for us when something is illegal. So it is understandable when these creatives don't accept their laws and rebel against them. An example is, if an artist steals a loaf of bread, is it wrong for him to steal it or be starving? His hunger pains might say no, when we might actually think it's wrong. As in the classic of Victor Hugo, the literary classic of Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, where Jean Valjean stole a loaf of bread because his family, his sister's kids were starving, and he got caught breaking the window, stealing the loaf, did 19 years hard labor, just to break out, be followed his whole life by the police, constantly on the run, and he became a saintly type that fed the poor. And I'm mentioning this because it's one of my favorites, but also because it leads into the actual atmosphere of Bohemian Paris, where many colorful crimes done by Bohemian artists happened, and which I'm going to discuss now. This is the Sacré-Cœur. It sits on top of the hill, overlooking all of Montmartre in Paris. 19th century Paris was once the art capital of the world, and a couple neighborhoods there were packed, overpopulated with artists and creatives and poets. It was really phenomenal how many were in these neighborhoods and crossed paths and fed off of each other. Montmartre was also a breeding ground for anarchists and revolutionaries, and many revolutionary skirmishes were done there, committed there and in and around, including the Commune. Now the Communards took over Paris for 2 months. They wanted to secede from France and start their own communal utopian society. Many were killed when the soldiers retook Paris and the other places in France that they took over. This church was built on the hill a couple years after the Commune was toppled, and the Communards that survived accused the French government of building that church because they wanted to cleanse the bloody ground. The truth is, it was in the planning a couple years prior to the Commune, but point is, the artists lived in a very rebellious environment. Poor artists who rejected laws and social norms and dedicated their life only to art and starved because of it, because a lot of them refused to work at anything. They didn't want to get a job, it was just art. They called themselves Bohemians in those days. And some examples of Bohemian crimes are insurrection. The great poet Charles Baudelaire and the great artist Gustave Courbet both fought at the barricades of the failed revolution of 1848 called Emoti. Courbet actually took part in the Commune, and he was given a position in the Ministry of Education in his new government, sort of a minister of culture. he and some of the people that worked for him went around and tore down monuments of France that they found distasteful to the commune. They also formed a artist federation that had a manifesto that ended government interference into the arts. After the French took back their Paris and the nation, Courbet was arrested and spent 6 months in prison for his revolutionary activities. He got out, went to Switzerland, and died there a few years later. He put himself into a self-exile just because he knew he was going to get arrested again for the same activities. This is a nice revolutionary by Delacroix, done in 1830. Different revolution. Many revolutions were fought in France. They was always picking up the stones and throwing them at the authorities. And these are where the artists actually lived. Aggravated assault and attempted homicide. The poets Rimbaud and Verlaine were followed by the secret police in Paris everywhere they went. The police had files, kept files on artists and poets because they felt they were a threat to society and societal norms. They were in a relationship for 2 years, and they had many extreme bouts of domestic violence. And one day Verlaine got extremely drunk, and he pulled out that pistol. That's the exact pistol he used, and he shot at him twice, hitting him once in the wrist. He got arrested and did 2 years in a prison in Belgium. This is the actual pistol, and it was sold in 2016 at Christie's auction house for 434,000 euros. Just another little interesting, because this was considered the most famous pistol of 19th century Paris. Drunk and disorderly, many violations. Amadeo Modigliani, one of my favorites from the Paris school, and Maurice Utrillo were constantly picked up for drunk and disorderly. Utrillo was an alcoholic and drank 8 liters of wine a day. He was famous for, matter of fact, he was so hard to manage, his mother would give him wine just because when he had wine, he was calm, right? So he was famous for painting these beautiful, lovely depictions of Montmartre. Some of them were very dedicated to Montmartre. And this is the Lapinagil that he painted. That's a cabaret that was famous. All the famous artists hung out there. Modigliani, Utrillo, Picasso, Apollinaire, Max Jacob, they all hung out there. It was packed with creative force, right? Creative energy. Prior to it being the Lapinagil, the previous establishment was a tavern. It was called Place des Assassins, the place of the assassins. This is a rough neighborhood. And such a rough crowd hung out there, it earned its name. To further reinforce how many creatives were in this neighborhood, his mother was Suzanne Valadon, who was a famous artist model and posed for many greats like Renoir. He painted her here. But she was also an artist in her own right. That's a picture she did of Maurice. Burglary. Blaise Cendrars was arrested for theft from a house. He once stated, "My opium is my writer's ink." And he lost his arm, another little tidbit of history, he lost his arm fighting in World War I. World War I was devastating to this artist community. Begging and failure to account. This is a portrait of Cham Soutine done by Modigliani. They were really good friends, and Modigliani did like 3 paintings of Cham Soutine. He was constantly arrested for chronic poverty and public begging. And just a note on how laws do change as case law gets made and society changes its mind about things. We used to have a law here that was an anti-loitering law, and no longer. Now you can stand where you want. It's a free country, right? There was also a law, he knows about this, that was failure to account. If a cop walked up on someone who they thought was up to no good, and you couldn't give an account of why you were there, he'd merely lock you up for failure to account. So that gives you an idea how laws change. Now, Soutine was very famous for all different kinds of artwork, but one series in particular, his carcasses. He'd go to the butcher, get a carcass, hang it up in his home studio, and paint it until it decomposed. And as it decomposed, you can actually see it changed the way the painting looked. In one little interaction he had with police, it didn't lead to arrest, but it's comical is that his neighbors got so tired of the stench one day, they called the police, they show up, and he argued that art is more important than hygiene. So, those dirty artists, I mean, And it's funny because in police jargon from the old days, they used to say, he's dirty or he's clean. And the people on the street used to say, I'm clean, you know. Illegal possession of firearms and firing of firearms. And ag assault, to name only a few, if the book was thrown at him. Both Pablo Picasso and Alfred Jarry, but Jarry was the more wilder violator, cocked and waved their pistols in the face of drunken adversaries at the slightest provocation. And they loved to shoot out the lights, the street lights, the gas lamps in Montmartre that lined the streets of Montmartre. Picasso carried a Browning pistol everywhere he went in Montmartre, which was again a very tough and dangerous neighborhood full of artists, criminals, thieves, anarchists. He shot the Browning into the air in drunken festive folly, and every morning, like a rooster, he'd shoot it out the window to wake up his friends. Alfred Jarry was well known to carry his pistol everywhere he went and use it to solve his daily problems. He would shoot the gun into the air to silence noisy children. He'd wave it around on a trolley car, an overcrowded trolley car, to find a place to sit down. And he'd wave it at pedestrians who got in his way when he rode his bicycle, which he was famous for riding his bicycle. The surrealist poet André Breton met him in 1905 and venerated him for his passion for both firearms and poetry, is two passions he had held in common with this gang of painters and poets, the surrealists. That gunslinging Jarry was very fond, he was a heavy drinker, and he was very fond of absinthe, which he referred to as absinthe, the holy herb. This is a small portion of my private collection. One of his closest friends described Jarry's daily drinking habits. He had 3 Pernod in the morning for breakfast. He had 2 liters of wine, liqueurs, and brandy at lunch. The Europeans always have heavy lunch. He had before dinner aperitifs, and after dinner he had a Pernod with a drop of writer's ink in it. Jarry's gunslinging antics are innumerable. He once had a disagreement with a patron at a cafe who was sitting with a lovely lady. They were sitting in front of a mirror. He pulled out the gun, blew out the mirror and shattered it, and then he turned to the lady and said, "Now that the ice is broken, we can talk." But this was a play on words because in French, ice and mirror are glace. On another occasion, he was sitting with a friend of Picasso's. He was a sculptor, and he thought he talked too much. So he tells the guy to shut up and leave. The guy refuses, and he pulls out the gun, shoots it into the mirror behind him, and the guy took an oath of silence. On one other famous occasion, Jarry was in the garden of an apartment he rented, and he decided to open the champagne bottles by shooting off the corks. The landlord runs up to him and yells, "Stop before you kill one of my children." And he said, "Don't worry." He told her, "Don't worry, if I hit one of them, I'll make you another." Jarry died at the age of 34, tubercular meningitis, and he left his dearest earthly possession, a pistol just like this British bulldog, to Pablo Picasso. This is a poster at the Chat Noir, another famous cabaret. So Montmartre and its cafes and cabarets were breeding grounds for the popular but banned anarchist movement, and many illegal newspapers and periodicals were printed there in Montmartre. Terrorist Act, Juan Gris, another painting by Modigliani. Juan Gris was once fingered erroneously for being a member of a political bombing group of anarchists, and they arrested him. He was finally cleared, but this kind of bombing and arrest were very common in Montmartre. Here are 2 really nice examples of Juan Gris' work. Conspiracy to commit political bombing. Speaking of anarchists, the art critic and gallery owner Felix Fenillon, who's seen here in a picture that was painted by Paul Signac, he championed artists such as the pointillist Georges Seurat, and he coined the term neo-impressionism. But he was arrested in 1894 on a conspiracy charge on suspicion of bombing a restaurant that was frequented by politicians called Foyot. He was also suspected as a co-conspirator in an assassination attempt on the French president Sadi Carnot, which was committed by an Italian anarchist. Felix Fagnon lived a double life. He worked quietly in the War Office of Paris, all the while secretly and actively supporting the anarchist movement, and was very involved in those newspapers that were printed. He was arrested along with 29 other anarchists on a conspiracy charge and eventually was acquitted, all to do with the bombing, which he might very well have been a part of, but they couldn't prove it. He was eventually acquitted. However, he used the trial for self-promotion. He was such a good speaker. He amused the jury and the public with his wit. He was the owner of a collection of 1,200 artworks. He championed many artists that were not accepted by the public, such as the Italian Futurists, and he curated numerous art exhibitions in his lifetime. This is his mugshot. Possession of stolen art. Guillaume Apollinaire and his dear friend Pablo Picasso were both arrested for possession of stolen art from the Louvre. It was in 1911 after an Italian immigrant named Vincenzo Perugia, who had showed you his picture earlier, stole the Mona Lisa from the Louvre. And the police were working aggressively at questioning suspects. It was a great embarrassment to the Republic of France. It was an embarrassment to the museum, but everyone was embarrassed up the line, the police, the politicians, the government. So they tried really hard to get this painting back. A friend of Apollinaire's, this is the great poet Apollinaire, a friend of Apollinaire's named Jerry Perret wanted to cash in on the notoriety of this theft. So he sold a story to the newspaper. He would visit the Louvre quite often and steal frequently artifacts from the storeroom by merely slipping them under his coat and walking out. So he sold the story and gave them an object to show them how the story's purpose was to show how easy it is to steal from the Louvre. He got paid, he fled to Brazil. Picasso and Apollinaire both bought Iberian artifacts. They both bought artifacts from Perret. They thought they were inspirational to him, and this is a lovely photo of Picasso. I love it. Him in his Montmartre studio, and you can see some of the exotic items he used to keep around him to inspire him. Through investigation, they were fingered by the police. So they were both arrested because not only were they friends, Perret, he also worked for him in his office doing some writing. So they connected the dots real fast. They arrested Apollinaire and Picasso, dragged them in for questioning, and Picasso only did 1 day in jail, and Apollinaire only did 5 days in jail, but they were terrified because they thought they were gonna get, this pinned on them. And not only that, Picasso was a Spanish citizen, but he was a French citizen, Polish born, French citizen, but very proud, and no good Frenchman would steal from the Louvre, so he was humiliated because they put his photo on the front page of the news in handcuffs for stealing the Mona Lisa. After he went into World War I, he got almost mortally wounded. It changed his life, and he was so proud that this photo circulated now, showing he defended France. So I started in Bohemian Paris. Very interesting, 19th and 20th century Bohemian Paris, very interesting to me. But now let me take you back to the Renaissance and the Baroque years of Italy. This is Tribute Money by Masaccio. It's a really wonderful fresco, part of a whole series. So Masaccio is believed to be, by many, the first truly Renaissance artist. He was born in North Italy in Emilia-Romagna, and he worked in Tuscany. But he made his way down to Rome I think he was 27 years old. He made his way down to Rome to take a commission. Now he's leaving because, remember, Italy wasn't a unified country, and he's leaving his area to take someone else's work, is how they viewed it. He died a mysterious death. He died of a mysterious death down in Rome while going to get this commission, and many thought he died of the plague, but many others really believed he was killed, poisoned by a rival artist, which is not unlikely. It's very likely that that's what's happened. If you think that art is tough today, and our career back then was treacherous, especially if you left your area to take other people's work. Art fraud. This is another fingerprint ink I did. I drew Michelangelo Buonarroti on a New Jersey police criminal card. Michelangelo Buonarroti committed art fraud in 1496. He sculpted a sleeping Cupid out of marble. And the older guys that put him up to this, it was a fraud / prank, but they wanted to make money. They took it and they buried it in earth, which they call sour earth. Maybe it meant it was like marshland, but they wanted to age it so they can sell this contemporary work as an antiquity. They sold it to a cardinal as a Roman antiquity, Cardinal Riario di San Giorgio, but the cardinal discovered he was duped and he demanded his money back. He gave up an original Michelangelo, which would be priceless today. This sculpture ended up in the Est collection and now is lost. But I'm going to show you this is Madonna Bruges of Michelangelo, just to give you an idea how lovely he did little children. So to give you an idea what that Cupid may have looked like. And a little tidbit of art history, this is the first sculpture of Michelangelo to leave the peninsula during his lifetime. This is a painting of Michelangelo done by Daniele da Volterra. They were really good friends. Daniele learned a lot from him and did many depictions of him. Volterra is also famous because after his death, he had painted in the Sistine Chapel, not the ceiling, but the altar wall where he did the Last Judgment. They had Daniele da Volterra paint wisp of cloth all over the exposed genitals. So he was called the breeches maker as a joke. That was his nickname, the breeches maker. Speaking of this master, Michelangelo Buonarroti, crimes do indeed have consequences, even those that last centuries. A young artist named Pietro Torrigiano broke Michelangelo's nose while they were both studying in the Sculpture Garden Academy of Lorenzo de' Medici. They were with a group of artists studying, drawing in front of a Masaccio in the Brancacci Chapel of Santa Maria del Carmine. Probably very well likely the Masaccio I just showed you, the tribute, but one of those frescoes in that chapel. And it was sort of like, that's the pilgrimage all artists made, to go draw in front of Masaccio. And as one story alleges, Michelangelo liked to banter the other artist, and he got Torrigiano so mad he belted him in the nose and broke it. He had to flee. Torrigiano had to flee and work as a sculptor abroad the rest of his life. Giorgio Vasari, the great artist and art historian who wrote The Lives of the Artists, tell a slightly different version. He says that Torrigiano was jealous of Michelangelo and he instigated the event. Here's another drawing by da Volterra, Michelangelo. He made the nose look a little better than it really was, but this was a big major event in his life for him. The broken nose is apparent in all the depictions of Michelangelo, and he suffered great mental anguish at his appearance for the rest of his life. But again, Torrigiano was banished from Italy because Lorenzo de' Medici, who was the most powerful man in Florence, now wanted to severely punish him. There are consequences for this crime. This is a Henry VII that Torrigiano sculpted, Henry VII of England. He is credited with designing the tomb of Henry VII. He's also credited for introducing Renaissance art to England, but he is mainly remembered for breaking the nose of the most loved artist in Italian history. And you mentioned Torrigiano, who knows him? Nobody. We all know Michelangelo. He doomed himself. His art career was hampered by his violent tendencies. He eventually died in Spain in a prison cell for violent crimes he committed there. Habitual offender. Michelangelo, this is habitual offender and homicide. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, better known as Caravaggio, one of art history's most famous masters and influential masters, had the longest rap sheet. He was born outside of Milan and was apprenticed in Milan, where he got proficient at doing still lifes. The Milanese artists were famous for still lifes. In Florence, they were famous for drawing in their paintings. In Venice, they were famous for color. The Milanese were famous for still lifes, and you can see this in a lot of his later works. The Bacchus has the fruit on the table, the boy with the basket of fruit. He utilizes this in many of his later works. He left Milan and went to Rome to get work and commissions, and Rome has some really dangerous neighborhoods and streets. Michelangelo Caravaggio was a street guy. He was a brawler. He was a womanizer. He liked to drink and gamble. He was frequently arrested by the police at the time, which were known as the Sbirri. Some of the infractions on his rap sheet are 1600, charged with assault. 1601, he wounded a guard in Castel Sant'Angelo. 1603, he was accused of defamation. April 1604, he was arrested for starting a fight at an inn named Il Moro. The fight started after Caravaggio threw a plate of artichokes in the waiter's face. October 1604, he was arrested for throwing stones at the police, the Sbirri. May 1605, he was arrested for illegal use of arms and carrying arms, a sword, which he was a very proficient fighter with the sword, and he carried it everywhere he went. And that was banned, by the way, but he had such powerful protectors, he got away with a little more than others would. July 1605, he wounded a man in a fight over a woman. May 1606, he killed a man named Ranunzio Tomassoni at Campo di Marzo in Rome over a game of balls. And this is it probably wasn't over the game. They believed that it was a long-going dispute. They believed that it was a fight over a woman. But now he has an arrest warrant for his life. So he had to flee and head south to Naples, where he remained only 1 year. But this is a short stay, but it's important to our story here. Naples was a different kingdom. Naples was the kingdom of Napoli, Il Regno di Napoli. Rome was the papal state. So for the time being, he was out of jurisdiction and he was safe from arrest there. This is Via Toledo in the Spanish Quarter in Napoli. And I'm showing it to you to show how they laid out, the city planning laid out this grid of very tight-knit streets and overpopulation. When the Spanish took control of Naples in the Italian South, they created the Spanish Quarter back in the 16th century. The concept was to build a tightly woven neighborhood that would give the Spanish control of the population if they ever rebelled. The neighborhood is laid out by 18 streets by 12 with over 14,000 people crowded into them. When Caravaggio arrived in this is one of the most wonderful cities on earth, by the way, I think. When Caravaggio arrived in Napoli and moved to the Spanish Quarter, it had extremely rough and dangerous streets. It was a tough neighborhood. The streets were treacherous, especially at night. There were prostitutes, thieves, criminals, and a wide array of unsavory characters. Caravaggio fit right in there. He found the quarter very suitable to his character and his needs. And as an artist, while in Napoli, he did many masterpieces. Some have left Naples over time and were removed, but 3 can still be viewed there, including this flagellation done in 1607, that's in the Capodimonte Museum, and this masterpiece, the 7 Works of Mercy, done in 1604, that can be viewed in Pio Monte della Misericordia. Again, he was only in Napoli a short time, but his powerful artistic presence changed how many painted there for years to come. He overwhelmed the city with his artistic force, his artistic power. And many artists became Caravaggisti, those who painted in the manner of Caravaggio. These artists just didn't share in the master's art style, but in his violent tendencies as well. And I'll get into that now, but first let me just close out the extraordinary life of Michelangelo. This is the Loft de Wignacoff. He was the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. So Caravaggio fled Napoli and went to Malta, where he ended up knighted as a Knight of Malta, the Order of St. John. As a knight, he was untouchable for the arrest of Tomassoni, for the homicide of Tomassoni. But he soon messed that up, and he assaulted a senior knight. So he had to flee Malta for fear of his life. He ended up in Sicily. While in Sicily, he painted this nativity with St. Lawrence. It is an important thing to note that this painting in 1969 was stolen by the Sicilian Mafia from the Oratorio di San Lorenzo in Palermo as a show of their might. They were showing their force, that they can get away with anything. It's still in the wind. It's still never recovered. It was a show of Mafia power on the island. So again, the crossroads where artists and criminals meet and travel together. Caravaggio got tired of living on an island. It could be tough living on an island, especially centuries ago, Sicily. So he left Sicily and briefly returned to Naples. He was now hunted by both papal agents with a warrant to kill him and assassins from the Knights of Malta who thought that he insulted their honor, so he was very uptight. He slept with his unsheathed sword in his bed. One day he was attacked by 4 armed men. They were organized criminals, not with those other groups. He got everyone pissed off, this guy. He was attacked at Osteria del Cerrillo while eating by 4 armed men. He managed to fight him off because he's a pretty tough guy, but they brutally deformed his face in that fight, but he did survive. By the way, this Osteria, founded in the 1400s, you can still eat there today. It's still in business. He responded by this incident by becoming a more powerful artist. An even more powerful artist is what artists do, right? While in Napoli this time, in 1610, he painted this painting, is the Martyrdom of St. Ursula, which can be viewed today in Napoli at Palazzo Zevallos Stiliano. He departed Naples with a promise of safe conduct, and a pardon was waiting for him in Rome by the Pope, but he had to get there. The ship passed Lazio and went up to the next region, Tuscany, and there in Port Ercole in Tuscany, he was arrested mistakenly by some authorities who were so dumb they didn't realize what he was saying was true, that he had this passage of safe pardon, safe conduct. So when he finally got released, the ship left with his belongings. The ship he was on left with his belongings, so he walked along the shore, mad, cursing, trying to catch up with this ship, and it is there that they believed he died of malaria. So Caravaggio, one of our most influential artists of art history, changed how artists painted for years, especially in Napoli. And this is a nice Caravaggio. He did David slaying Goliath, and he put his face on the severed Goliath's head. So back to post-Caravaggio Baroque Naples. But first let me explain that in Naples and its region, Campania, there is a mafia organized crime group culture that is older than the Sicilian Mafia. It's called the Camorra, La Camorra. These 2 Vincent van Gogh paintings were stolen by a Dutch national in 2002 from the Vincent van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. A Dutch national named Octave Durham, seen here, stole these merely by, he saw a window open in one of the top floors, took a ladder, climbed in, ran off with the 2 paintings. He brags about being a born burglar, master burglar. That's his life. He sold those 2 works to a Camorra boss from Napoli, Raffaele Imperiale. Imperiale hid the 2 works in his house outside of Naples, Castelmare di Stabia, and these are the 2 works. Congregation leaving the Reformed Church at Nuenen and beach at Cevengen in a stormy weather. The Carabinieri in 2016 got a tip, got a warrant, raided the house in Castelmare di Stabia, and recuperated the paintings. They are now back in Amsterdam in a museum. He was hiding in Dubai. They finally arrested him in Dubai. Dubai is a favorite destination of these organized crime types these days. In 2021, he was arrested, extradited back to Italy, and is now cooperating with the authority, which is another example of the crossroads where art and crime meet. I find it interesting because a lot of people deny that organized crime types in Italy don't have an interest, or in Russia, or in obviously Montenegro, but they do have an interest in these artworks, and they put their fingers in everything. So the Camorra is organized crime, and it has bosses, captains, and many tough soldiers they recruit at a young age. They bring them up young in this. There's an estimated 10,000 Camorra soldiers. The Camorristi commit violent crimes against victims such as extortion, threats, violence, murder. In the history of art, in the history of the Napoletan school, there is also recorded a Napoletan Cabal who, like the Camorra, intimidated non-Napoletan artists with death threats, vandalism, violence, and murder from the 1610s to the 1640s. They were determined to prevent artists from other regions to come into Napoli and take their commissions. Artists who did come into Napoli were harassed and intimidated in Camorra-like fashion. 3 actors of the Cabal, who were the main actors, were Giuseppe Ribera, one of the greatest. He was like one of the greatest Caravaggisti to follow Caravaggio in his footsteps. Here is Apollo slaying the satyr Marcellus, slaying him live, skinning him. So you see the violence in these guys comes out really easily. One note I'd like to say about Caravaggio that I find interesting, as violent as he was and as even murderous, his religious paintings are really spiritual and beautiful. It's a strange thing, but maybe inside there was something good in him. I think about things like this all the time. I'm weird like that. But so Giuseppe Ribera, Battistello Caracciolo, and Belisario Corenzio, any artist that wasn't considered Napolitan was harassed, got death threats immediately upon arrival. This is the amazing Duomo in Napoli. So like the control the Camorra yields today, commissions in Naples had to be approved by the Cabal triumvirate. If non-native artists accepted commissions, they would swiftly receive anonymous death threats. Their works in progress would be vandalized and destroyed. The Cabal was particularly possessive of any commissions in this Duomo, especially the Cappella del Tesoro, the Chapel of Treasures, that of San Gennaro, the patron saint of Naples, Saint Gennaro. And Saint Gennaro is a really big deal in Napoli. He's the patron saint. He protects the people. They love San Gennaro, and he's very famous here because we have the big Saint Gennaro's feast in New York every September. But many artists from northern Italy were dumb and did accept those commissions and went down to do the prestigious commissions. Some managed to do it, like some were tough guys and survived, including Guido Reni. This is a lovely Guido Reni right here. Oh, that's a Ribera. He did San Gennaro. I wanted to show you that one because it's a beautiful Ribera of San Gennaro. Here's Guido Reni. Cavaliere di Arpino and Annibale Carracci all suffered greatly. Many followers of Carracci were harassed and attacked. All of the artists met some kind of harassment right up to major crimes committed against them. Reni accepted a commission to do a fresco in the Duomo of Naples, but his life was threatened and the Cabal planned on poisoning him. Reni's assistant was beat up really badly at a level of almost aggravated assault. And Corenzio was accused and arrested of this assault. He fled back to Rome after he recovered. But Corenzio was arrested, accused of this assault, but they had to release him because they didn't have enough evidence against him. This is another Guido Reni. Both these paintings can be seen in the Capodimonte Museum in Napoli. He didn't paint these there. They ended up there with the Farnese collection from up north, ended up in Naples. But I'm just trying to stress with you, when everyone hears Italian art, Renaissance, Baroque, right through to contemporary, they think Turin, Milano, Venice, Rome, Florence. But Napoli is a cultural center of Italy. It's an artistic pilgrimage you have to make. Like, it's the pride of the south of Italy. The great artist Domenichino. This is a Domenichino that's in the Duomo. He was summoned in Rome and he accepted a commission to work in the Cappella in 1630. His wife tried to talk him out of it because she knew what goes on in Napoli. It had a reputation that went all over Italy. Immediately upon arriving in November of 1630, he received his first death threat. He was promised protection, but never felt safe, even in his own house, even in his abode. He would go to work all day, go home and sleep, go back and find that previous day's work destroyed. They were really giving it to him. They were threatened by him because he was such a great artist. Here's another one he did in the Duomo. So in 1634, he decided life in Naples is unbearable. And he left and went back to Lazio, which is the region of Rome, the papal state. He had to leave his wife and his daughter behind, and he was planning on bringing them once he could manage to get them back up into Lazio. And he felt they'd be safe because now that he gave in and he left and gave up his commission, the Cabal wouldn't be after him, which is sort of true. But he left his commission unfinished, and that got the commissioners of the church angry, who complained to the viceroy, who was sort of like the governor of the region. So now the viceroy was furious, and he arrested his wife and daughter, threw them in a cell, and held them hostage until he came back. So now he comes back, and he lost what little protection he had to begin with because now the viceroy is mad at him, so he was on his own. And they gave him 9 new commissions. So he didn't want the ones he had, and he got 9 new ones. And he was sure that the Cabal, including the martyrdom of San Gennaro, which was a prized painting that the Napolitan wanted. So now he was sure they were going to stab him or poison him. So he lived in fear of shadows, dark alleys, and eating his food. So on April 3rd, 1641, he wrote his will. A few days later, he got sick by a mysterious illness, and he died on April 15, 1641, and his wife swore that he was poisoned by the Cabal. Here's another beautiful inside that Duomo. Domenichino did a lot of work there. So in Naples, there's a famous saying, Vedi Napoli e poi mori. See Naples and die. What they're trying to really say is Naples is so beautiful, once you see it, there's nothing left to see. See Naples and you can die. But for Domenichino and a lot of the artists that went there, it was literally true. You know, they saw Naples and they died. So there's enough material to do 10 or 20 or 30 lectures of artists who have committed crimes over the centuries or even over the millennium, but Tim would get really upset with me. Here I only briefly touched on 3 great periods of phenomenal artistic production: the Renaissance, the Baroque, and Bohemian Paris, the Paris School. But I only briefly touched on them. I could go on and on and on with stories from those eras of artists like Benvenuto Cellini, who was a swashbuckling wild man. This is his Perseus cutting the head off of Medusa in Florence. Or Carlo Crivelli, another one of my favorites. Carlo Crivelli abducted the wife of a sailor and was sentenced in 1457. Or Gauguin, another tough guy in France, or many others. Here's an animal painted on the cave at Altamira, Spain, done by one of our earliest ancestors of art from the Paleolithic era. The earliest paintings in these caves are from 36,000 years ago in the Upper Paleolithic time. And they painted underground in the dark at torchlight from memory. They were great artists. 36,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, but humankind already started creating and making art. But these were great artists if you think about what they went through to paint that. Here's another example from Val Camonica in Lombardy region of Italy. There's 2 warriors. These are petroglyphs, rock incisions, and it dated from about the 8th to 6th millennium BC. In an 8,000 year period, they did from 200,000 to 300,000 of these rock incisions. One note of pride in Italy is that this was the first site recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Here is a view of, there's some animals in Val Camonica, and there's a view of the rock, how it's laid out. So I'd like to try to get you to use your imagination here and think what it was like, artists leaving his area where he lived and going to someone else's area and painting on a wall or incising on a rock. And along comes a thug caveman with a club or a spear and ba-da-boop, ba-da-boop. You know, I'm sure that the crossroads of art and crime met and traveled together even thousands of years ago. Like the Otzi, the Iceman, who was found well preserved in the ice up in the Alps. This is how they found him. They even had food in his stomach. He lived about 3,500 BC. And this is how the forensic scientists know he looked, feel how he looked once they redid the drawings. So the scientists know he figured out through study that he was, an anthropologist figured out he was probably a tribal leader, but he definitely was an important man by the items that they found on him, like decorated weapons and different things. It wasn't a robbery. He lived all the way in Sardinia, traveled all the way up to the Alps from Sardinia, and there the locals killed him. But it wasn't a robbery. They didn't steal his items. It was like a hit. They hit him and they ran. But again, the crossroads where art and crime travel together go back to the beginnings of humankind. There are numerous cases right up to our lifetime, including Salvador Dali, who was one of the biggest fraudsters of art. The dealers paid him checks, put thousands of blank pieces of paper in front of him, he signed them, and they sold them as numbered prints, and they made about $12 million a year on the earnings from this fraud. And the market in Dali prints was greatly damaged by this. Then there was also the artist Anna Mandietta's death in Soho, and the Carl Andre trial. When Anna Mandietta fell from the window in their Soho apartment, Many of Carl Andre was arrested and put on trial for this. The two had a very volatile relationship, and many of her friends believed he pushed her. And this trial divided the New York art world, divided it, mainly among gender lines. But and there were a lot of hard feelings when he was acquitted. But these are complicated cases, and they can be discussed in future talks if there's an interest. Often in the history of art, many artists have proven to be insolent, intolerant, and contemptuous of societal norms and laws, and have rejected those norms and laws and created their own values and moral rules. Walking down their life's path in search of something extraordinary and creative, often their paths were not the straight and narrow, but crooked detours that led to the crossroads where artists and criminals traveled together. Thank you. Maybe the cards weren't a great idea.
Throwing them around, it's like, nothing's changed, Mrs. Sabba. Still just throwing everything around.
When I wasn't looking, someone shuffled them on me.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If in Napoli, these artists were getting harassed and killed and imprisoned, why were the church officials continuing to invite other artists to come into the town where they knew they were going to have trouble?
It was very interesting. Naples had a lot of great artists. Stanzione, Ribera was one of the greatest. Even Corencio, these were great artists. And they got a lot of work. All the churches in Naples, there's a list like this long, full of artworks. I mean, Napoli really is a center of was such a center of artistic production. But in the north, there was these tremendous artists, like Domenichino, Reni, and they wanted to bring more of these really proficient artists from the north who painted different. Every region had their, like I said, in Florence with the drawing, in Venice with the color, and they wanted to bring some of that in. And I mean, Domenichino's was such, and they felt more threatened by the better the artist was, and he was getting the better commissions.
Where did you get your history from? Like, who was writing this stuff down if you guys were fighting in a bar?
Remember one thing before I go on. He knows this because he worked with me. He was a captain. And when someone has a rap sheet, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. That's what they got caught for. That's not what they got away with. So Caravaggio got away with a lot. And that was only what, so they have records. His rap sheet's on historical record, So every time he got arrested, but that's why I had to read it, because it's like bullets, boom, bullet points, boom, boom, boom. There were so many. Yes?
I brought up Caravaggio, but why not talk about Bernini as well?
Yeah, like I said, I could go on and on and on. But I was told to not go on for like 2 hours. So their circumstances were, especially back then, remember, they were considered menial labor before Michelangelo. It started changing. It changed a lot. Like, it had periods where artists were considered menial labor. The rich people didn't want their kids to become artists because, especially sculptors, you get dirty. They wanted them to be pharmacists, and each period had a different. After Michelangelo, people started thinking genius. Maybe this artist is a genius, and then like say in the 19th century, they were considered the lone genius who is misunderstood by all the world. So it got, and then in the 1960s, artists started putting on work clothes and saying, I construct things, I'm a manufacturer, So it went through periods, but back then, their life was pretty tough. You got sent early. Michelangelo, I think, got apprenticed when he was 14, the Ghirlandaio, but they usually went earlier. They had to leave their family and go with this group, and you duked it out when things weren't right. The artists could slap you around, and you had to walk around those streets, and it was artists usually were in poor neighborhoods. Right up till now, I mean, the only difference is now, which is a weird phenomenon, is when the artists move into a neighborhood, it becomes all the rich people move in, and they have to move out, But yeah, I could have went on and on about so many of them. Anybody else? Yes?
Was there any artists that didn't cross over?
A lot of artists that lived really nice lives. I mean,
Name one.
well, I will say, like, even Salvador Dali, when you hear of these artists that were womanizers and beat up on their wives and abused their wives psychologically like a Picasso, but then you had Salvador Dali who loved Gala and never would cheat on her. You know, so I mean, he was well behaved. He just wanted money at that period and was signing those slips. I don't know of any other crimes he committed other than that one. But I mean, greed gets the best of some people. We can tell you as cops that all people have good in them. There is that potential that someone can do bad, you know. So then comes that word again, he's dirty, you know, or he's clean. I mean, but even the cleanest guy might get one thing on his rap sheet and then straighten out again because in his heart he or her is good, you know. But yeah, no, many artists like Chagall, there's a lot of artists who you're not going to hear that they misbehaved, you know.
Yeah, because I was an art history major and they didn't tell us this in schools.
They had their own way of looking at life and societal norms, you know. And like the Catalan, I love the Catalan I showed you where he's running away with the champion ready-made. Let me see if I can find it. I mean, he's a great artist in Italy, Maurizio Catalan, and he played with, I talked about him in my last he's the guy who did the banana and taped it to the wall. But, I mean, he did so many antics teasing the law. You know, like he did the burglary. He couldn't think of a concept, so he had up to the last night, so he went and he burglarized another gallery, stole all not just the exhibition that was in there, but all the contents of the room, went to his gallery, set it up in the middle of the room, and said another effing ready-made was the title of his. And one that I love is that he couldn't come up with an idea for an art show in Italy, in a gallery in Italy. And up to the last second, he had a brain fart. He couldn't come up with like writer's cramp, do they call it? So he goes to the police station and claims that someone broke into his car and stole the piece. It was in the trunk that he was going to put in the gallery. He falsified a report. And then when he took the official police report that he falsified, that they stole his artwork, went to the gallery, framed it, signed it, and he hung that as his piece. It was ingenious, you know. And another time he did this, some bank robbers stole like $700,000 out of a safe crackers, and he got his hands on the safe and he made that his ready-made, and he put that and then he made it into an artwork. So I mean, a lot of different paths crossing there. Art and criminality. Also police, because there were police that loved artists. There was one in Montmartre who they were, you know, here's this cop coming, he's gonna, you know, harass us, he's gonna bother us, but every now and then he'd get a work from him. He ended up retiring with a huge collection. And there was in Soho too, Bobby Volpe was the art cop. He's a friend of mine, now passed, God rest his soul, but he was the protector of artists. I mean, they'll hunt down stolen work. They'll give you a hard time if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. But then at the same time, they protect you, you know, because you're in tough neighborhoods, and your work gets stolen and your work gets vandalized, you know. Okay, thank you very much.